Hey, this is Monique. I just did one more project. So fun. It is a baby bib with a monster face. I love it.
I saw something kind of like this on Pinterest, and it actually took me to a website where I was able to download the bib design. And then I decided to change a few things, of course, but I found some flannel that was the right sizes that I would need, and I changed the way the pattern was a little bit, but so I sewed all those layers together. That is the top, the bottom of the face, and the teeth. So then I was going to find the middle there so that I could hoop it up. I tell you, sometimes hooping it is such a pain, but it has to be done to put it on the embroidery machine. Anyway, there's a pin so that I can kind of get to the middle. Underneath there was some tearaway stabilizer, and then I have the white for the big part of the eyes and the black for the little part of the eyes. Now, if you don't have an embroidery machine, you can do this by hand. It's just hard to make good tight circles. So since I do have an embroidery machine, are you crazy? Of course I used it. So anyway, I pulled all those layers in there and got them in there good and tight. Tight is important in embroidery. Now I'm going to pop that onto the machine. It moves in two directions so that it can make any shape you want. I only am doing an outline stitch that is just a regular stitch, doing it in the circle on the black, and then I'm not taking it out of the hoop, but I'm taking it off of the machine so I can cut away the extra fabric beyond where I sewed it. So I end up with these two black circles. However, at this point, they are only sewn on with just a straight stitch, and that is not what you want. That will not last very long because of it being a flannel. If you had felt, or if you used polar fleece or something like that, you could just sew it with a straight stitch, but this needs more. So now I'm going to let the machine run around it with a satin stitch. Satin stitch all the way around of both of those eyes. I have to tell you, I probably should have trimmed that just a little bit tighter than I did, but it's going to be fine. After all, it is just a bib. It's something for someone to drool and spit on, but I like it anyway. Okay, so then I'm going to let it sew around just the outside part of the white on both of the eyes. Here again, it's just a single stitch. It's not the satin stitch. And then, can you guess? Do you know? Yep, you got it. I'm going to stop it and take it off of the machine and cut away some of the threads so it's not so messy. Cut away the extra white so that I can applique. If I was just sewing them solid, you would leave it on there and let it sew for days, but I didn't want to use all that thread. I wanted to use more flannel. So now I'm going to trim. This time I did trim a little bit closer around the eyes and get away all of the extra white fabric that was there. I did make this on my computer software, but my software is very old, so I'm not showing you that process. If you happen to decide you want to get into this game, trust me, you can't even find software as old as mine. So anyway, trim that off and then put it back on the machine and let it satin stitch around the outside of both of these big googly looking offset size eyes. When you're sewing a satin stitch like this on the embroidery machine, you do want to be sure and change out your bobbin thread to the really fine lingerie thread, the bobbin thread. They're called a couple of different things, but it's a thinner thread and it will help you have a smoother finish on top if you use that in the bobbin on the bottom. It's white. I think you can get it in black, but it doesn't matter. If it's done right, it never shows on top. So it doesn't matter that it's not the same color, because even if you can see it on the bottom, it's going to be weird looking. It's not going to be your finished looking product. So be sure and change your bobbin to that really fine thread instead of using the regular thread. So I did the eyes in the hoop and let the machine do it. After all, it was much easier to make nice circles when the machine was doing it instead of me trying to freehand it. But the teeth, you can see that my mouth is too wide. I wanted it to go all the way across the whole bib. So I'm going to freehand it on the machine. I started by making pencil marks on my flannel so that I would know where my teeth were going to be, and I didn't have to guess at that once they were up on the machine. But I did the same thing that the machine did to make the applique, and that is I started by doing a straight stitch on the line that I had drawn already. I put it in the middle. It defaults to the left. I put it in the middle, my needle, and followed my pencil line so that my teeth were fastened down. I did not trim them first because I was going to be spinning the fabric around instead of it being so flat, and that would have made it start to ravel. So then I switched it to a zigzag stitch, and I made the zigzag stitch a little bit wider than what the machine defaulted to, but I also made the stitch length very short so that it makes it a nice solid white line on the teeth with the stitches instead of being really gappy. So there's some things to know. When you got to the point when you're doing a straight stitch, you leave your needle down, you spin it. But when you're doing it with the zigzag, you're going to move the fabric over a little so that your zigzag doesn't end up next to it, so that it ends up on top of it. If you just turn and go again, you're not going to have the points the way you want. They're going to be funny looking. So move the fabric over a little, but spin it with the needle down. That always helps keep things at least as close as possible if you turn the fabric with the needle in it for it to rotate around. And at the end, just a little back stitch to help hold it. Now trim off that extra white fabric. Now the advantage here is because the teeth are all pointy like that, is that I'm actually cutting on the bias. So if I don't get super close, it doesn't ravel the same because it's the bias instead of straight on the stitch. And this is the stabilizer I told you about earlier. You always want to use the stabilizer when you're doing embroidery because it's going to help keep your fabric flat and tight. Then now this is the back piece, and line up the bib pattern, pin it on there. I do use pins when I do a pattern. Pin it on there and cut that out. That is going to be so cute. All right, now make sure you have right sides together. That is, the outside faces the outside so that your seam allowance goes to the inside. And look how many pins I use for this little bitty thing. It's because it's got so many curves. Curves are hard to hold straight if you don't do something to help them, like pins. Now I started there on the side, and then you got to go slow here around this curve. It's hard to do that tight little curve like that. But I'm going to sew most of the way around, but when I get back to where I started, I'm not going to finish closing it up so that I will be able to turn it right sides out. Because as cute as it is, it's much better if it's right side out than wrong sides out. So here, as I'm finishing up here, I'm not going to go all the way back up to where I started. See my finger up there I pointed, and then I stopped. Now, very, very important for this, clip your curves. This is a math thing. You want to release some of the fabric so that it can turn and be the other way. Clip all the way around. The really straight pieces don't need it as much, but the super tight turns need more. And then at the back of the neck, I'm not just clipping, I'm actually removing some of that fabric just to keep it from being so thick up inside of there. Now to turn it, I have these, what are those? Those are chopsticks. I love those chopsticks. They have been so useful to me. So I'm using it to push, and I started at the farthest point from the opening to turn it all right sides out. It takes a little working and pulling, but keep doing it until you get the whole thing. And then I'll have to work this other side of the part that goes around the back of the neck to get it, because it's too skinny to put my finger in there. So there, look at that. That is starting to be fun. Now I worked out all of the edges with my chopstick. See, if you do something too pointy, if you use a bamboo skewer, you're going to stab all the way out the end, and that's no good. So this is better because it's not quite as pointed. Now a little bit of pressing to get it all lined up so that the edges line up and don't stick out. And then I'm just going to iron in the place that I left open to turn it. So now I need to close that and put fasteners on it. So I'll show you what I did. I had this snag free is what it's called, but the hooks and the loops are on both sides. So I started at that, and I went around the velcro up at the back at the neck, and then down the side, across right there above the teeth, and then back up the other side, because the other side is where it was open for turning it. And so instead of having to do it by hand or make it just on one side, this worked. Now make sure the velcro is on the correct side, because I've done that before, and it doesn't work if they're on the same side. They have to be on the opposite sides so that they can overlap each other and actually hold the stinking bib on. Anyway, finishing up all the way around on that velcro, a little back stitch, and I trimmed off the corners of that velcro. This is for a baby, And even if it wasn't for a baby, who wants the Velcro corners stabbing them in the back of the neck? So I trimmed off the little bit of the corners there, and then it'll be at least a little bit softer. And ta-da!
Thanks for watching. I hope that was fun. I sure thought that came out cute. Remember, rejoice always, pray continually, and give thanks in all circumstances, for this is God's will for you in Christ Jesus. See you next time. Remember, I can't remember. Rejoice always, pray continually, give thanks in all circumstances, for this is God's will for you.